In the early hours of June the 17th, 1943, an RAF plane secretly landed in Nazi-occupied France. On board was a princess from a titled Indian family. She was also a British spy. Young, beautiful, and codenamed Madeleine, her assignment was described as
the principal and most dangerous post in France.
Her skills as a wireless operator would provide a vital link between Paris and London. In a city controlled by the Nazis, her life expectancy was just 6 weeks. Noor Inayat Khan was an unlikely secret agent. In training, her instructors described her as
clumsy, easily flustered, and pretty scared of weapons.
But her conspicuous courage in extreme danger would earn her the George Cross, one of only 3 awarded to women in World War II. Tonight, with Noor's family, Timewatch tells the inspirational and tragic story of a forgotten hero, the Princess Spy. The Bavarian Alps in southwest Germany. For centuries, the mountains and dramatic landscape have attracted visitors to the region. One of those drawn here is David Harper, who 20 years ago started a company running historical tours. Because within this idyllic alpine setting, there are echoes of one of the darker periods of German history. Nazi leader Adolf Hitler chose this spot, close to the Austrian border, for his mountain retreat. It was called the Berghof.
The Berghof, where Hitler lived, was more than just a holiday home. It was more than the second seat of power after Berlin. It was in fact a place where very devastating decisions were made, military, political decisions. In fact, one could say that the spark that ignited World War II stems from that very spot.
But 60 years after the end of the Second World War, it's a personal family war story which has begun to preoccupy David. Claire Harper is David's mother. She is also the sister of Noor Inayat Khan, a British secret agent who disappeared during the Second World War.
For quite a few years, my mother's been writing her memoirs. Lately, she's been writing a lot about Noor. It's quite painful for my mother. She probably never got over that loss and that sense of tragedy. I found myself typing down what she's written by hand, and she dictates to me. And I'm finding out a lot about her past and her family that I never knew about.
Coma.
Yes?
Remembering, good, when the war is over.
Probably when I was 5 or 6 that my mother started talking to me about Noor. I knew that she had been very heroic and had done something wonderful for her country or for peace in the world, but I didn't know that much about it, except that the family was still grieving for Noor when I was a child. There's always a sense of heaviness and great loss, which I didn't really understand that well when I was a child.
Claire's difficulty in coming to terms with Noor's tragic loss has encouraged David to embark on a personal journey, retracing the steps of the aunt he never knew. The extraordinary details of Noor's time as a British agent can begin to be unravelled here, at the National Archives in West London. Her file, which has been shrouded in secrecy for over 60 years, has recently been declassified by the government and released into the public domain. It reveals that Noor Inayat Khan was recruited into the top secret and highly sensitive world of the Special Operations Executive, or SOE. Its headquarters were here, in Baker Street, in central London. Its objective: to wage a secret war behind enemy lines in Nazi-occupied Europe.
London, please.
Colonel Maurice Buckmaster headed the French, or F section.
F section's agents were intended to do two main jobs. One of them, sabotage. Secondly, they were to help to arm underground movements if ever the French were capable of producing a secret army of guerrilla to operate behind the German lines should an invasion take place. You can't have armed action without arms. And the great importance of SOE on the continent was that it was the channel through which arms were provided.
What F section needed was spies, men who could take on false identities as French citizens working undercover in occupied France. It would be one of the most dangerous missions in the Second World War. But with an acute shortage of suitably qualified men, in April 1942, Churchill took the controversial decision to recruit women to serve behind enemy lines. One of them would be Noor.
The very idea of sending women into possibly the most dangerous form of armed combat you could imagine, which is working without any sort of protection or uniform behind enemy lines, whereby if you were caught, you'd have no protection of any international law. You'd almost certainly be shot, of course, is unusual.
But of the 37 women agents that SOE sent to France, Noor must have been the most unlikely spy. Descended from Indian royalty, the overriding influence throughout her life were the teachings of her pacifist Sufi father. Noor was born in the shadows of the Kremlin in January 1914, where her father, a Sufi mystic, was teaching at the imperial court. Her mother, Aura Ray Baker, was an American who had fled her own family to marry Noor's father. In the early 1920s, the Inayat Khans moved to Suresnes, a western suburb of Paris, to this house, provided for them by a Sufi benefactor.
The name of the house is Fazal Manzil, which means blessed house or house of blessings. My grandfather gave it that name.
Like Noor, her nephew David Harper spent much of his childhood in this house immersed in the teachings of idealism and self-sacrifice.
This was known as the Oriental Room. This is where Noor's father, my grandfather, received his pupils, his followers. Looks very much the same that it did in the time of Noor when she was a child here.
Harsh reality was to intrude on Noor's idyllic childhood when ill health led to her father's death when she was just 13.
After the passing of our father, our mother was in such a desperate condition that Noor Nissa took on her to take care of the other children. She became the second mother. She handled the household and helped with the education of the brothers and sisters and made sure that their shoes were polished and clothes were clean and so on.
Noor was academically gifted, writing poetry and stories, and she would later study child psychology at the Sorbonne. But Noor's real passion was music, the harp being her favorite instrument.
The family would give concerts. They would have to then put on their Indian clothes in the evening and perform for my grandfather's guests.
Noor also wrote for children, her stories appearing in the Paris newspapers and on French radio. By the age of 25, her book, 20 Jataka Tales, had been published in France, Britain, and America. But Noor's pursuit of artistic endeavours and